Welcome. It is another Max World Live on this great Saturday afternoon here live on 99.3 KTIA. Sorry about that. That number slipped me. We're live also powered by WebcastOneLive.com, and my guest today is the incredible Jonathan Narcisse. I've known Jonathan for a lot of years. I have to tell you that I love this man. He's a friend of mine. I mean, this is a guy that if all heck broke loose, you know this. If in your life you could call me and I'd be there. So I'm a little biased towards this guy, but I'm going to try to sit back and ask the questions that you would have in your mind as we go through the conversation today. And the first thing we want to talk about is, and I want to get this right, what you think the people of Iowa should demand out of a legislative agenda this year in Iowa. Is that fair to say?
Well, there's what Iowans ought to demand, and then there are the things that we're specifically going to take to the legislature as dying on the hill issues.
All right, and when you say we, you mean we the people.
Well, we the people, but also the Iowa Party is a bipartisan effort. We aren't trying to create a new party in the sense we're competing against Republicans or Democrats. We've created a mechanism to challenge both Democrats and Republicans to do the right thing. We had a good showing in the 2010 elections. We have been at the state fair the last couple of years and built up some tremendous momentum. And come the legislative session this January, we're going to go on the Hill with a core reform agenda that we feel is worth basically throwing down the gauntlet for.
Now, we've got a lot of legislative challenges and elections this fall. I know we've got 2, maybe 3 debates that we're doing here in Max World. One, well, I shouldn't name them because I can't think of them all, but one is Legislative District 36, one is 30, and then the other one is Warren County, Katie Roth and her opponent. So do you see a changing of the guard in the legislature? Is Governor Grandstall going to have less power this year?
Well, first of all, I think that, and this is something that needs to be clarified, I believe that every night, the first person Governor Branstad thanks God for in his prayers is Senate Majority Leader Mike Grandstall, because he gets to blame everything on him. The fact is that Governor Branstad in multiple areas has simply abdicated his responsibilities, not to begin with the fact that his 4 campaign promises, 3 of them were simply absurd to begin with.
Which were?
He promised to create 200,000 jobs.
Okay.
First of all, it's not even government's job to create jobs, Mac.
Okay.
But he promised to create 200,000 jobs, and we knew that wasn't going to happen. He promised to raise personal family income in the state by 20%. We knew that wasn't going to happen. He promised to cut government by 15%, and as one of his first acts, he threatened to shut down state government if they didn't give him a budget bigger than the one Culver had signed the previous year. And he promised to create world-class education, and yet the architect for his education vision was the former head of the Register's editorial department, who did more to damage urban education in Iowa than any living human being in this state.
Who was that?
Linda Fandel.
Okay, but now she's gone and somebody else has been brought in, right?
No, I'm saying she's his education guru.
Okay.
He hired her, which and this is the amazing thing about the rhetoric of conservatism and republicanism. This hire alone should have caused Republicans and conservatives to go to war with the Branstad administration over this hire, and yet they simply did what Republicans in the state have done since Branstad was elected, which is go along to get along. But Mac, those 3 promises were clearly absurd, and his argument of creating world-class education, which we have the potential of, we've seen absolutely no movement to do that. He hasn't addressed any of the fundamental problems in Iowa education. He instead of opting out of No Child Left Behind, he sought a waiver. Basically, he wants to keep getting the check, but he doesn't want to dance with the devil, so to speak. Well, if the devil's paying the bill, the devil's going to have you dance his dance. It's just that simple.
So what was the outcome of that?
He got a 1-year stay of execution.
Okay.
But the fact is, No Child Left Behind has wreaked havoc on what was once the best public education system in the known universe, the Iowa public education system. It has wreaked havoc. It has had no positive impact, no positive outcomes. And instead of recognizing that you cannot allow Washington to dictate in Iowa what education should look like, the Branstad administration has simply tried to trim the reality of No Child Left Behind, and it hasn't worked. They said no to his waiver request, but they did give him a 1-year extension to try to get it again. He simply should have opted out as governor.
When is that 1-year extension over?
Up at the end of this school year that's coming up.
This school year,
yeah,
so in May.
Next year we're in May, June. Next year we're going to be right back there again. He hasn't addressed any of the corruption that exists in public education. Now let's look at the Medicare program. We know that there's huge amounts of fraud because you have doctors claiming things like 400 to 500 patients they treat daily. Well, in Iowa, for decades, we've claimed students that simply don't exist. We call them phantom students or shadow students, but they simply don't exist. They're like those 400 to 500 patients that don't get treated. 60 to 70,000 kids a year have been claimed for decades. Republicans know it, Democrats know it, yet no one wants to do anything about it because everybody participates. This is a $500 million to a $750 million flat-out fraud comparable to the Medicare fraud, and the Branstad, Paulson, Gronstal administration has done nothing to address that. You look at the construction fiasco in terms of schools. Because local option tax were threatened, because voters wanted accountability, a bipartisan legislative initiative agreed upon by Governor Culver created a permanent penny tax. We now have this permanent penny tax that exists as a shining example of the incompetence, the futility, and the fraud of government. So you have districts that are building $1 million or multi-million-dollar athletic facilities. They're tearing down schools to build new schools. They're closing good buildings because they have to spend this money to build new buildings. Meanwhile, these same districts with declining enrollment can't pay teachers and can't buy books. Kids can't take books home to do homework because they can't buy books, but they can build a $3 or $5 million wrestling facility or a multi-million-dollar tennis court. Now, instead of providing executive leadership and saying we're going to put an end to this sham, or at least I'm going to challenge it, the administration has gone along with it. Now, the worst and most egregious area, and I've often called legislators and read off this list of 34 staff in this school district. They have 2 business managers, a transportation director, an assistant transportation director, a board secretary, a student secretary. Many of the staff are related. And I've asked them, I said, how many students do you think this district has? Now, granted, they have not only 2 business managers, but a transportation director and assistant transportation director. They go out a few hundred, 1,000, couple thousand. I say, according to the state, 94. Now you know I do my homework.
Yes,
so
you
I
do.
didn't just take the word of the state-funded website that published they had 94 students. I called the superintendent principal and confirmed that they actually have a whopping 106 students. Now I haven't found a human being alive that has said that's reasonable, yet no one attempted to do anything. And here's the bigger issue. In 1950-51, we had 4,652 school districts. I can show you in this book, but you know I'm telling the truth on it. But we didn't have 4,652 superintendents or bureaucracies paying people 6 figures. Today, we have this massive bloated bureaucracy. We have 12 to 15,000 bureaucrats where you can't find a human being that can explain how they contribute to the quality of education in our state. Now, executive leadership would have said the time has come to fire some people. You want to know the first place you begin fixing public education in Iowa? You deliver that time-honored tradition called the pink slip. We have 45,000 employees for 70,000 students at the Regents levels. Now, Governor Branstad didn't stay out of the Regents battle, he made sure his biggest contributor, Bruce Rattler, was basically put in charge of our region schools. But when it came to reining in the runaway massive bureaucracy of the regions, crickets chirping. Governor Branstad has suggested all kind of things that really are politically palatable, especially as it relates to teachers, like we're going to make it harder for them to do X, Y, and Z. He's never addressed the massive and bloated education bureaucracy that exists that costs $750 million to $1 billion in taxes that Iowans can't afford, prompting him to want to do things like raise gas taxes on hardworking Iowans. It's absurd.
Jonathan Narcissus is my guest today in Mac's World. You mentioned Bruce Rattler. Say the last name.
Rastedler.
Rastedler. Did he get a pass here this last couple months? Should he have gotten in trouble for what he did?
Well, the issue wasn't whether he should have gotten in trouble or not. The issue is that the Branstad Paulson and this aspect, the wing of the Grunstall administration, chiefly the Senate, never should have put him in charge of the regions. He brought nothing to the table in terms of lifting up higher education in Iowa. What he did was he wrote big checks to the Branstad administration. One thing I've had a chance to do with both Republicans and Democrats in the Senate is challenge their negligence and malfeasance as it relates to the Senate's most sacred responsibility, which is advice and consent. They're the ones who approve department directors. They're the ones who approve board members and commissioners. And the board and commission structure in Iowa ought not exist as a reward system for political patronage. It ought to be the policy engine that drives governance in Iowa. Instead, under the Branstad administration, the Vilsack administration, the Culver administration, and now the Branstad administration, boards and commissions are little more than rewards for political patronage, and that damages our ability to have good and accountable governance in Iowa.
Yeah, you're obviously passionate about our education here in Iowa because you spent 2 terms on the the school board here in Des Moines.
Well, it was 1 term. It just seemed like a lot more to some people. And it was a shortened term. The legislature actually passed a law to change the law so they could take a year off my term. Unfortunately, what they didn't do is reform a system that allows 60 to 70,000 non-existent students to be counted to the tune of $500 million to $750 million fraud.
Jonathan, are you trying to tell me that you think the legislature changed the law to get you off the school board?
Well, I'm not saying that. Now, a front page article on the Register said that, and the individuals who advocated that change in the law said it.
Yeah.
I'm just simply saying that they got so emotional and so irrational that they bragged about it before the law was changed, but they bragged about it after the law was changed.
Now, we didn't talk about this, so if you don't want to talk about this, I'll respect that. But if you had been on the school board during the Nancy Sebring fiasco, how should the school board have handled that differently?
Here's what would have happened. They would have tried to cover up the fact that she was released for violating a technology policy that she tried to get me thrown off the board for allegedly violating because I had the audacity to ask staff their opinion on how we should best legislate. So she can't say she didn't know. Mac, I wouldn't have lied to the public. The board lied to the public, and I would have basically gotten in trouble because I would have came on your show, and I would have probably came on other shows, and I would have said, they're saying Nancy left because of her daughter's wedding and to get rid of Omaha. That's not the truth. She left because she violated the district policy. But more important, this is hard evidence of the things we need to correct. What offended me was even more than the lie was that they continued to employ the Sebring family after the lie was made public. And do you realize tomorrow the Board of Education is considering revoking the charter for the Des Moines Charter School because the board, not Sebring, allowed this travesty? There were real consequences even after she left and the board failed in their responsibilities, not to mention they threatened to do things like to destroy the character of outstanding people like Kitty Wessenauer, who Nancy and her sister conspired to blame for the fiasco at the charter school. The board became aware of this and did nothing in terms of dismissing Nancy's sister as head of the charter school. So no, had I been there, we do know this, that the public would not have been lied to by everybody on the board.
A year down the line, a year and a half down the line, will Nancy Sebring be a superintendent somewhere? Will her sister, her twin sister, be doing just fine? Will the police, not the police, the Army gentleman that got caught up in this, will he be reinstated? Will we just wash this under the rug and forget about it?
You know, this was my response when the scandal broke. I said she reaped what she sowed. I'm praying for her. I hope she rebounds. I think deep down she's a decent person. I'm sure he's a decent person, and people make mistakes. The issue to me was always the board's negligence. At the end of the day, she was our employee.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. And this is why the Branstad administration can't just blame Grunstow. Mike Grunstow.
All right, sure. I'm not going to let you segue to Branstad yet. We got to take a break.
Okay.
Jonathan Narcisse. I love this man. He's fired up. And here's the deal. Jonathan, shut your ears for a second. He's usually right. I mean, he usually does his research, and he's right. And he rises above. He's like the cream. He rises above all the political garbage that's being spewed to protect people's arses. And in the end, his numbers match true. We'll talk about Governor Branstad and his administration and what Governor Narcisse would have done differently. That's next, live here on Max World on 99.3 KTIA, Iowa. We are back on this Saturday afternoon live here on 99.3 KTIA. Jonathan Narcisse is my guest. You may recall Jonathan was a candidate for governor in 2010.
2010.
And did a great job. You went to all 99 counties?
We not only that, but we got support in all 99 counties and in nearly every single precinct in the state.
So you were the only one out there talking above the fray. You were the only one out there bringing the facts.
I told the truth about stuff.
So why don't Iowans want to hear the truth?
Well, I think Iowans are very nice people.
Are you the Ron Paul of gubernatorial candidates? Because don't you think Ron Paul always tells the truth?
I think Ron Paul mostly tells the truth. There are a couple of areas where I think that the truth telling may have been a little fuzzy, but that's okay.
Okay. So why didn't the state of Iowa? Because you had name recognition. Well, now, maybe not as much as Branstad or Culver.
Well, you know, we ran against two incumbents who had never lost a election in their entire life and had tens of millions of dollars to spend. And we just had no idea what we were doing. I started really campaigning after it was already over. And you learn. You learn. It was a wonderful learning experience. I loved getting out there in Iowa. As you got further away from the major media centers, you actually had a much higher caliber of questions and comprehension. In places like Des Moines and Cedar Rapids, they basically asked you questions like, do you think you have enough hair to be the governor of Iowa?
Right.
In places like, I remember the O'Brien County Bee, where she goes, okay, you want to be governor? Fix Medicaid. I was so excited. I pulled my whiteboard off the RV and grabbed my dry erase markers and eraser and calculator and my data and sent our advance team ahead to the next county. So it was a wonderful experience. We stayed positive. And we offered solutions.
Now, as I recall, and I may get this right, wasn't the Times Republican in Marshalltown, weren't they a big fan of yours, or the Waterloo Courier? I remember you and I on the phone one day.
Well, here's what we had a lot of people who liked us. One thing that happened when I announced that I was going to primary Governor Culver, I didn't understand what was going on. Now, partly in my defense, I'd never run for governor before, and partly in my defense, I had just gone through some very emotional, personal issues. But the day I announced was a Saturday. By Monday, there were endorsements that were flying in from around the state, and the Democratic Party's chairman had announced that they were going to endorse Governor Culver. And when we were in Cedar Rapids that day, they said, "Would you challenge Governor Culver to a debate?" And I said, "Well, why would I do that? First of all, I don't think he'd accept, and second, that'd be like a jockey stepping in the octagon with Quentin Rampage Jackson. If his people let him debate me, I'd sue him for political malpractice." Well, this got picked up and asked of a Governor Culver instead of saying like Congressman Boswell said often, "No, I won't debate." He goes, "Well, we'll see." Sure. So now he's locked into a debate. If I'm on the ballot. In Carroll, on that Tuesday, I get a call from Kay Henderson saying the Democratic Party's planning.
Kay Henderson is Radio Iowa.
Right. Planning to endorse Governor Culver. Do you think that's fair? And I go, fair. I think that's one of the coolest things I've ever heard in politics. Now, at this point, I didn't have a sense of just how many people, labor and others, wanted someone to run against Culver. And I had a real shot at this primary. And then I got to the point where I had my signatures. Now, we didn't have the double signatures I thought I might need because, you know, of the challenge we might have to getting on the ballot. But we had our signatures. And I thought, you know what? I don't necessarily like the platform of the party. I don't necessarily like what's going to have to happen in terms of my being super hyper negative. Because if I would have ran against Culver, it would have been reduced to what's wrong with him instead of what we were advancing, which were solutions. And the other thing is, if I didn't win, would I be able to create what we've created, which is a 99 county presence, basically looking at the long-term approach towards creating balance within both parties. So I decided to run as an independent. But there was but you know, as I look back now, I suddenly realized just how serious a challenge it would have been, especially once we got in the debate. Though, you know, Governor Culver, who's a heck of a nice guy, he's a really nice guy. He's a really decent human being. But Mac, those would have been fun debates. those would have been real fun debates.
Jonathan Narcisse is our guest today. We've only got about 7 minutes left, and I want to get to Jonathan's main passion today, and that is the legislative agenda and what Branstad is doing right and mostly what he's doing wrong. And here's where this came up. Tom Coates and I and Craig Robinson, right, did a show one day, and I don't know if you were watching live or you watched it on podcast, and my Facebook just lights up with Jonathan. I mean, I didn't know you could type that fast. You were really cooking about what was said that day about Governor Branstad because you don't agree that he's doing a good job.
Well, first of all, Governor Branstad is a very able man.
Yes.
But his policies are wreaking havoc in this state. And we could and I actually want to spend the last few minutes talking about some things we're going to be pushing. But the fact is that while Governor Branstad continues to blame Mike Gronstone, blame the Democrats, even though he has a Republican House and he's the governor and has the big pen and the big chair, the fact is that his policies are not advancing this state. We now have a state where 30% of Iowans are clients of DHS. In places like Des Moines, we now have 70% of the families with kids in the district unable to feed them. Governor Branstad has not reduced government. He's actually grown government. His budget now is actually bigger than that of Culver's. And no one forced him to do that. And in the final analysis, you know, he is basically, you know, under the Democrats, we saw this, you know, we want to basically throw everything in a pot and have everybody take one out. Now Governor Branstad is saying, well, we need to keep taxing Iowans. In fact, we need to raise taxes like the gas tax, and then we need to throw it in the pot, and then we just need to let a few people decide what the rest of us get. Now, that's actually the definition of small n, small s national socialism. It has nothing to do with free market economics. And at the end of the day, Iowans are not better off than they were in 2010. But here are some of the things that we actually are going to push in the upcoming legislative session. The first one focuses on human service reform because we spend out of $14.1 billion, 40 cents out of every dollar on welfare in this state. Wow. Now under the Branstad administration, we didn't see any of the kind of reforms we're talking about. Basically, what his administration said is we'll pay for everything. Food, rent, utilities, give you a cell phone, and you sit on the couch and wait for your next check. Our 3 points that we're pushing for in the next session as it relates to welfare reform are: one, you need an ID to use your benefits. In other words, if you go into a Hy-Vee with a food stamp card, you ought to show ID. After all, if somebody worked hard and took a check and they had earned, they'd have to show ID to cash it.
Right.
Now, doesn't that seem reasonable?
Yes.
Except to the 151 people on the Hill. Now, that was not something that Gronstal had to shoot down that the Branstad administration proposed because they didn't propose it. The second area is drug testing. I've never used drugs, sold drugs, or bought drugs, but it's my understanding they're neither free nor cheap. Now, if you can afford dope, then you don't need our assistance.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have some kind of drug treatment strategy. In fact, we ought to have a drug treatment strategy in this state that diminishes incarceration, especially since so much of incarceration is drug related.
Yep.
But as it relates to welfare, the fact is that if you're on welfare, you should be drug tested.
Yeah, because employees
are drug
of
tested.
the government are drug tested.
Absolutely.
And if you're getting money from the government, you're kind of unemployed.
Absolutely. Now, the third area that we focus on is we're not saying you don't need help, but we're saying that there are more ways to give you help than provide you benefits. For example, by helping you rebuild your esteem. So we think that the day that you get your benefit card is the day that you ought to get your work assignment. Volunteer at a school, work at a nonprofit, pick up a park. Now, these are none of the things that Branstad had to have shot down by Gronstal. Gronstal didn't say, no, Terry, you can't have these things, because none of these things he proposed. And the other thing we think is that they ought to simply comply with the law. The Branstad administration doesn't need legislative action to comply with the law. Do you remember when Joe Wilson said President Obama was lying? Mm-hmm. Do you remember why he said he was lying? It was because he said we're not going to give benefits to illegals in violation of the law. Now, this is what President Obama said. But Governor Branstad's administration has consistently ignored federal law and provided benefits to individuals illegally, despite the fact that they not only are not entitled to them, but it is a violation of federal law to provide them. Now, this is something he simply could have fixed with an executive order, which he has not been hesitant to fix. This is a hundreds of millions of dollars fraud to Iowa taxpayers, billions to federal taxpayers. And yet Governor Branstad has not lifted a finger to simply enforce the law. Forget Gronstal or Paulson. So these are things. So that's one of the first things. Now, another area.
You have 1 minute and 4 seconds.
Okay. Another area we talk about is criminal justice reform. I'll finish on this one. Under the current administration, Governor Branstad, the Branstad, Paulson, Gronstal administration is perfectly cool with our inmates basically lifting weights, smoking dope, getting ripped, and 3 hots and a cots at $82 a day, not including meals. We said, make them productive and put them to work. Now, we want, one of the reasons for the gas tax increase is the need for gravel. Our position is that you have about 7,000 to 8,000 potential gravel makers behind bars.
Yeah.
Now, we actually do some proactive things in education and other things, but doesn't it make more sense to you to basically, because I said to one county supervisor, where does gravel come from? He said, I said, what is gravel? He said, small rocks. I said, where do small rocks come from? He said, big rocks. I said, well, I don't know why we have a gravel problem. We need to raise the gas tax.
Jonathan Narcissus is my guest. We'll have him back soon. Thanks for listening. It's a Saturday afternoon, and we're live on 99.3 KTIA, Iowa.